Hello everyone, welcome to my presentation. In this presentation, I'll be analyzing the first movement of Bela Bartok String Quartet number 4. I want to assume that everybody has already listened to the whole movement so that I won't spend much time on playing back the audio. I just want to focus more on my speaking. So let me first introduce a little bit about Bartok. Bartok was a Hungarian composer, pianist, and ethnomusicologist. He is considered one of the most important composers of the 20th century. He is also known as the folk music master who has used a great deal of Hungarian folk music elements in his music works. This work, String Quartet number 4, was written in 1928 and is one of his six string quartets. Bartok used to declare that his works, particularly the string quartets, were written tonally, but the first time I heard of this, I didn't agree with that. However, after I looked into the details of the piece, I sort of realized what he was trying to point out, that tonality in the piece is actually based on a tonal center that may contain a bunch of notes being moved around. Obviously, unlike composers like Beethoven or Mozart, Bartok's music vocabulary, as demonstrated in his string quartets especially, departs from traditional use of major and minor keys, focusing more on the chromatic scale and attempting to utilize each note equally. Also, he would incorporate whole tone, pentatonic, and octatonic scales, so on, as subsets of the chromatic scale. With this all in mind, let's now jump right into my analysis. First of all, this movement is written in sonata form. In exposition section, we have this primary theme area, transition here, and STA, which is secondary theme area, closing here. Then the development section, I divided this section into 3 phases. Actually, phase 1 here, phase 2, phase 3 here, and finally we get this recap section. We again get this PDA, transition, STA, closing, and the last section is coda. Let's just go back to the primary theme area in the exposition. So the first 2 bars are actually consist of 2 parts. At the first bar, by following the millisecond rule that Bartok established, we can find that the X, and the motive X. Then we have volume 1 part, which simultaneously get this inverted X, and in the second part, the motive Y, we have volume 1 and 2 both going descending, and they are actually in a parallel relationship, and they're being more fluent or cohesive than motive X. And in the treble part, we get this counterpoint that supports the bass line. In terms of the tonality, I think the primary theme area that sort of aims on the C as the tonal center. You see the C here. And I also think Bartok is trying to create a blended sound effect that semitone feeling is kind of intertwined with the whole tone feeling. If we closely look into the part, we can find the F natural, F sharp being as the highest notes, C being as the lowest note in this case, very short D here, and then finally we get this B flat. If we were to assemble this group of notes, we could get B flat, C, D, E, F sharp as the final version, which is the whole tone scale indeed. So even though Bartok established a sort of minor second word as at the bar 1, however, he directly, or dramatically I should say, drags us into the whole tone series world, which they interfere to each other from horizontally to vertically. At measure 5, we get this very different layout. The music material or gesture Bartok has used here is tightly related to the motive Y. Unlike the first phrase, we now have the instruments playing one after another, sort of like a stepwise structure. And interestingly, we again get this minor second sound effect. You see the E flat here on the cello, E natural on the viola, F natural on the violin 2, F sharp on the violin 1, which sort of builds up a consecutive semitonal sound color. At bar 7, we sort of reach this very important place where the chromatic element Z, and marked Z, well, this is used many times in different ways by Bartók throughout the whole movement, and we will see that this is actually reused by Bartók in many places. We will see that later. And if we focus on the very end of the third beat, we hear this entire instruments playing all at once. The B flat, C, D, E, this group of whole tone cluster plus the element Z, that actually manifests what I said before, a combination of semitone and whole tone sound color, and the rest of the section just follows this same formula. In the beginning of the transition part, we first hear this D getting repeated over and over again as the accompaniment being performed by viola. And meanwhile, 2 beats later, we can hear the cello sounding like di-da, 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 di-da. So later, we also hear this violin playing di-da, 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 di-da. Well, these little gestures are actually made of Y and X with a different form. So, the inverted Y and X. And Bartók uses these motifs and frequently alternates them in this transition part. The first time I heard of this, I thought it would be the secondary theme area, not the transition. However, I soon found this region that is, in fact, not stable in its tonality. In other words, I can barely decide which note could be the tonal center here. It's just very unsteady. Moreover, another reason that can prove this area is actually not secondary theme area is because I think the melodies being performed by violin 2 are not declamatory. And they are sort of wandering from low register to high register and being quite successive. At the end of bar 26, we hear this gesture or motive Z back again, unlike last time it appears. This time it gets more sharp and intense. Now we moved into this secondary theme area. The reason that this measure could be marked as the beginning of the secondary theme area is because first, we're on a different tonal center here, which is F. It's the A flat, C, and F. Sorry, this is the C. This is the F, and this is the C. That could be recognized as the F minor chord. Secondly, it's going relatively stable. Besides, we do get a declamatory melody J. And then we get this whole bunch of whole tone series Q playing first by violin 2 and then viola and cello. On third beat of bar 27 here, we have the Z again. There are also a large amount of note E here, here, and here, especially the measure 43 here, where the secondary theme area ends up on this E. This actually represents the key where tonal center has changed from F to E. In the closing part, we still have this Z and its deformed version. You see, at bar 46, I feel like this little moment could be defined as the climax over the whole exposition. And finally, we after both, these viola and cellos repeating in the fast triplets, as well as the E, the whole exposition ends up here. Then let's now talk about the development section. Like I said earlier in this presentation, I divided the whole development section into 3 phases. And where the most of the contents inside can be originated from or derived from the music materials in exposition section. So phase 1, the very first thing that comes up here is this X. Then we next encounter this, glissandi, which is a new element that Bartók first used in this section. At bar 54, we get this little gesture that resembles the motive Y that first appears at bar 5. And this phase 2, you might wonder that why I did not include bar 58, which is this measure, in this beginning of phase 2. Well, I think it is because of the dynamic change here, right on this bar 59. So before bar 59, music is sort of on a low status, whereas the music becomes quite soft on 59. So I think this dynamic change could explain why I choose bar 59 as the beginning of the phase 2 rather than 58, which is this measure. Even though they share with the same gesture that originates from gesture Q in the secondary theme area. And it's actually a development version of it. At the bar 60, where we have X and Y back, and obviously they derive from the transition part in exposition, so you see this cello part. And this time Bartók develops this gesture a little bit further and have this playing against those 30-second notes. And ultimately we get this phase 3 here, and we have this Q playing against the Z, so Z comes back again. I think this phase 3 is the most dense part, where the Q and the Z have been used ultimately so many times by Bartók. I just really want to exclaim that Bartók is such a genius to lay down these music elements pretty hierarchically. And in terms of this recap, I think there are several meaningful changes that Bartók has made, while the rest of parts are basically just similar to those in exposition section. First thing I noticed from these changes is that, still about the Z, Bartók inserted the Z in between the phrases of PDA, whereas he did not do this in the same position of exposition. Second, at the bar right before closing, which is here, right before closing, we see this emphasize the ending note C, which can signify that we now have the tonal synthesis that is still remain after transition. We can also find the C being repeated by cello when closing part begins. I think Bartók has given us a very interesting coda section. You see this post gesture. I call this post gestures because the 4 instruments are all playing this same quarter note all at the same time. So and the reason Bartók inserted a post gesture in between these 2 Z elements is because he wants to break out the consistent feeling of Z via using its relatively softer quarter note. And what's even more interesting is that the quarter note soon gets increased on its quantity. So it's a D, then this time it gets to 4 quarter notes here. And another interesting discovery related to this post gesture is that it always starts on note G sharp G sharp, G sharp, G sharp, G sharp, and ascending. All right, I think that's all about my analysis. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you can learn something from it. Thank you.